Are you frustrated that all your drawings of flowers end up looking a bit the same, a bit generic, and not as real as you'd like them to? These 6 steps of my flower drawing process should make this a thing of the past.
And I suggest, if you want to get the most from this video, that you don't try and draw along with me, but instead focus on understanding the 6 process steps that I'm taking, and to see me first put them into practice in my drawing. Then you can use the reference photo, which you'll find on my community page, to have a go drawing this yourself. And then if you want, you can watch my demo again, comparing it with your experience of your recent drawing, and you may realize that 1 or 2 of the steps need more focus when you actually draw. Let's start. I often talk about spending a couple of minutes experimenting with the marks we think we're going to use to draw our subject. I have whole videos on doing this, but I just wanted to show you that it's a vital part of my general drawing process.
The first point in my process is to pay particular attention to the anatomy of this particular flower. Part of the reason we end up with generic flowers is we tend to generalize what we see. And so even when we've looked at all the petals and worked out the actual shapes of these petals and how they attach to the center, which of course varies from flower to flower, we still don't allow for the individual differences in each of the petals of this flower. So that's the first thing. I need to spend time before I put any marks on the paper really examining the key elements of the flower head, which will be the shapes of the petals, how the center section is formed, and how the petals attach to it. So you'll see that I started by doing some marks to define the center area of stamens. I think of it as a lot of fluffy things that sit on a plate. And then the petals come in and attach to the plate in different ways. Sometimes they come out or they hang down. Sometimes they come out, but they step up a little as they move outwards down their length. And that's what these daisy petals do. So there's a bit of a dip when they get closer to the center of the flower. So I want to try and capture that. I want to capture some marks to represent the rippling, the folding of the petals. They're not flat. They actually have surface shape if you were to do a cross section like a small hill or a series of small hills. So again, I want to use some marks that will capture that feeling. But I can't capture what I haven't seen. It's when I start to think I've seen enough that I start to draw from memories of flowers rather than these actual flower petals. And that's when my petals all start to look the same and my flower starts to look generic and in effect starts to look cartoon-like, which is not a good thing if we're going for a sense of reality. Now, you'll notice I did the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock petals, and I paid attention to their size and where their endpoints were in relation to that center plate section of the stamens. And then I take one of the longer petals going out to the left-hand side and one of the longer petals going out to the right-hand side. I find if I do that and then I fill the other petals in, my petals overall are in the right dimensions, the right proportion for the size of the flower, but also for one side of the flower to the other side of the flower. I find with plants, whether they're green leafy plants that have a central stem or flowers, it's very easy for one half of the plant or flower to be larger than the other, that if we move around in a clockwise direction, we tend to get larger or smaller in our scale as we go. So I find doing this stops that from happening. Now, my second point is to realize that perspective affects not just buildings, but every single thing we see, even an irregularly shaped thing such as this flower head. So some of the petals we're looking almost side on at, and we see their full length, but not that much width. Others we're looking more straight at, but down a bit. And in that case, we see more of the width, but the length is foreshortened. And so we need to take all these perspective angles into account when we draw. My third point is non-committal edges at the start. Now, when I first began to draw that central disc shape of stamens, you'll notice that I didn't do a circle or an ellipse, as more the case it should have been. Instead, I did a series of dots, because when I studied in my first process step, when I studied the particular anatomy of this flower in this view, I'll add, I saw that a straight line wouldn't capture the rippled effects of the petals as they move closer towards the stamen area. And on the far side, that we actually see the edge not as a straight line, but as a silhouette edge of the stamens sticking upwards. And again, if I'd drawn a straight line, because I'm drawing, not a straight line, but a continuous line, because I'm drawing directly in ink, I wouldn't have had a chance to then correct that. So keeping my options open till I'm ready to put more detail by using marks that won't conflict with my final mark making is a really helpful way of thinking and of starting and progressing our drawings when we draw directly in ink and we can't erase anything. I'm using a 0.2mm Copic multiliner with this. So the fourth point is actually silhouette edges. The edges of anything we tend to focus more attention on. Our brain often seizes edges to gather information about what we're looking at more rapidly. And so therefore, I want to pay attention to my silhouette edges, and particularly in this center stamen filled area. All the more reason not to rush with a straight line. Now, my fifth point with flowers is when I actually draw the petals, not to see them as a shape, a cutout shape to draw an outline around, but to see them as perhaps in our mind, larger objects than they are, that are folded in certain ways, that need separate lines to capture the folds, to actually see that in our head in the reference first, and then seek to draw that. So a series of separate lines where we don't let the pen linger and get blobby, where we also, though, and this is the key element of this, this fifth point, we need to vary the line strength. So we avoid the even outline around the whole petal. We have some parts of the petal outline with a heavier mark, a fuller mark. Other parts where whatever the thinnest, finest, faintest line we can get out of the pen that we're using, we try and produce that to give a lighter sense. That often can be very good for a delicate material and surface that's actually curving away from us into light, that it's almost not an edge at all, it's so insubstantial. And so a light line for that can help to create the sort of visual effect of reality with these sorts of subjects. And it's also making our drawing look less cartoon-like, because one of the characteristics of cartoons is that all the elements, all the individual shapes are heavily outlined with the same continuous line. And it's this oversimplification of mark making that often creates a cartoon-like. Now, I was also wanting to hatch to represent the local colour, that dark golden yellowy colour. And I want that contrast because I think the overall drawing will need that. The sixth part of my flower drawing process is to spend as much time and emphasis and effort doing everything I've just said about the flower for the leaves and for the overall shape of the flower stem, spray, bush, however much we're looking at. And so it's very easy, I've noticed in drawings, even where the flower is done quite competently, to see that there's been less focus, less observation, less consideration of the impact of perspective, more of a rush just to do outlines of leaves without focusing on the particular characteristics of these leaves and their silhouette edges, the one line strength, and what we end up with is a weak spot in the drawing, which unfortunately, as happens with most weak spots, draws our attention more than the things that are better done. So I need to pay attention to the particular flower, all parts of it. I need to consider perspective with how that affects the different flowers that I see. And of course, every flower angled differently to me as the viewer will have a different perspective at work. I need to, particularly at the start, work with non-committal marks so that I keep my options open for creating the shapes and the forms, the three-dimensional forms, with whatever visual effects I want, how I want them. And I need to vary the line strength to avoid a heavy outline in different parts. And particularly with petals, not necessarily do them as a straight outline. And I need to put the same emphasis on my leaves and stalks and the overall plant as I do on the flower. These are the steps I take in my mind, and I hope you've seen me demonstrate in this drawing of a Shasta daisy that I think help me move away from an oversimplification that looks cartoon-like to something that captures more of a sense of reality. As I said, you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page, and you'll notice I deliberately put marks on the paper when I was drawing the flower to indicate what I was looking at and how I was aligning various parts that I was yet to draw with parts I had already drawn, often placing a dot to help me make the petal go to the right spot and be the right length and shape and so forth. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. So why not give this a go? It's a lot of fun and it's not a huge time commitment, but we can practice all these really important drawing skills. But look, in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, however many steps in the process there are or aren't, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.